Welcome to the group chat with Tara Thomas and Amanda Goodman of Faith and Four-Letter Words.
Happy Monday, everybody. Hope you're having a great start to your week. I'm Tara Thomas. My co-host and comrade and friend and partner in crime, Amanda Goodman, is off this morning. Her daughter and her daughter's team are going to state this week in soccer. Exciting time for them. So the send-off is this morning, and Amanda was going to be with her daughter and her team. So I said, sure, I'm happy to solo the group chat. So we're happy that you are waking up with us. If you have not looked out your window or heard the patter of raindrops on your roof, it is extremely wet out there. And over the weekend, oh my gosh, I had a lot going on. And yesterday, my son and I were driving back from Peoria, Illinois, my hometown. And let me tell you, it was a torrential downpour off and on for the entire trip. It was absolutely awful. It was literally like somebody was holding a fire hose and spraying it on our windshield for most of the return drive home. So if you were out and about, especially to the southeast portion of our state, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, at least 3 wrecks that we passed along the way where people, I'm sure, either were hydroplaning or lost control or both, and saw some tough car wreck situations that we drove through. And it was so crazy because, you know, lately, if there's rain, it's manageable to still drive through. But this was like probably one of the worst torrential rains I've ever had to drive through. And then once we got into Waterloo, the rain started here, and now it, you know, persists this morning. So really crazy because it was like everybody going through construction zones would then be hit with this blinding rain. And so when you're down to single lane, semis everywhere, and then, you know, the rain is blinding, it made driving conditions absolutely awful. So we even saw a lot of people that were pulling over on the side of the road with their blinkers on, but then that's a hazard too, because then as you're approaching these cars, you can't see them very well. So needless to say, a lot of that 3-hour, 20-minute drive, I had the blinkers on too, because so many cars around you were almost invisible until you got right up near them. So because of how heavy that rain was. So it was so interesting. So many people, including semis, were driving with hazards on, which is never fun to navigate when you're going through the heavy traffic of I-80. And then that area south from Cedar Rapids to Iowa City, if you've traveled it recently, it's very congested because of all the construction. So last week, when we were going to one of my son's baseball games, a car had actually stalled on the side of the road on 380 in the midst of some of that construction. There is no exit because of the barriers up. So the car being being stalled, had nowhere to move aside, and there's no shoulder. So it caused this half-hour bumper-to-bumper traffic jam like we were in New York, right there down 380. And I just thought driving back through it then today was even worse, because at least when that car was stalled, there was no, you know, crazy weather going along with it. So my throat is kind of dry. I wasn't thinking this through soloing. I should have grabbed some water before I came into the studio. So a couple of things I wanted to share about my fun-filled weekend. My alma mater, Peoria Emmanuel High School in Illinois, was hosting over the weekend a Hall of Fame and Distinguished Alumni banquet. As it turned out, I was tapped to MC the event, which I thought was a wonderful way to sort of give back to my school and to be able to lend my professional MC services to the event. So a lot of fun. My mom, my sister, and I all went on Saturday night, and the venue for this event is called now an event center, but it was Stage 2, an under 21 dance club back in the day when I was growing up. So spent many times in my teen years in that space dancing to all the then, you know, crazy 80s and 90s music that we loved. And what's really funny is I saw my freshman year of high school, I saw New Kids on the Block perform in that club when they did their first tour to a lot of small town venues before they hit it big. And so this is when only like Please Don't Go Girl had made it to the charts. And it was very fun to see them in person in this intimate space. And it was like when some of their members were as young as me, so like 13, 14 years old. And then my mom had been in that club years before, long before I was there as a teen. She saw an Elvis impersonator in that club when it had been called Second Chance. So it was fun that she and I had a little bit of a walk down memory lane when we went in there on Saturday. And my high school just had some incredible athletes over the years, especially in basketball. And so we had a good time recognizing and inducting some of these stellar athletes into the Hall of Fame. That was a really good experience and to be a part of. And a pro tip that I will share with you is the key to having a successful event, especially if you have to get through a lot of material and you don't want to bore people, is get somebody who can read really fast, efficiently, and keep the program moving. So there was a little bit of a holdup with serving the meals to everyone. And that was then, dragging out the start of the event. So I told the organizer, I said, listen, even if people don't all have their food yet, we need to get this rolling because you don't want people to feel like this took too long and they're bored, because they'll never give you honest feedback necessarily to your face, but they'll go tell everybody they know, we don't think that was a very worthwhile event. It was too slow, too long, too boring, and they'll never come back. So you only get that one chance, to kind of make the first impression. So I was grateful that back in my, of course, newsreader days, I can very much move through a lot of material quickly and if necessary, cut and summarize as we go. So I was able to really plow through all of the names and the bios and the background, and it went really well, considering there were some challenges, with the food being delayed and then just how these things go. A lot of times people don't come right when it's supposed to start. So, we literally still had people coming in to be seated when we needed to get the show on the road. So it was just a good way that we were able to navigate making it happen despite some of the challenges. And that's really always the key to your event, is make sure that you have somebody that's doing the Master of Ceremonies honors that has an eye for, how the audience is feeling and can be receptive. Because a lot of times people will say, oh, well, so-and-so wants to be the MC. Well, so-and-so may not have that background. They may just be a part of the board or a big fundraiser or a volunteer. And so I think organizations default to have somebody like that do it because they want to give that person, the opportunity to be seen and be on the mic. But you need to be mindful of, are people going to enjoy themselves? And if it takes too long, if you have a dinner that drags out before the program starts, people start getting antsy. So my logic is always, if you're the MC and you're eating, quick meal, get on the mic and start the program. Let's get it going, even when people are still finishing their meals. Okay, Monique, our French friend, is back. Good morning. You were all alone. I just opened the chat. Well, I'm glad that you're joining me, friend. Yes, Amanda is with Gia. She's doing her soccer send-off as the Hudson girls soccer team heads to state for the 4th year in a row. So it's been exciting for Amanda's daughter, who's now a senior, to be a part of a state team, a team that, had the opportunity to go to state every year that she was in the school. Very cool achievement. So after the banquet, I stayed with my mom, and it was so fun because we watched the new season of a series we like on Netflix. It's called The Four Seasons, and it has not Amy Poehler, Tina Fey. She's one of the producers. And then Steve Carell was in the first season. And the fun thing is, if you are a child of the 70s or 80s, then you may remember that iconic movie with Alan Alda called The Four Seasons. Well, this series, modern day series, is based on that movie that many people remember and loved from the 70s, as do I. I watched it, when I was older, many years later, but just a classic movie. So they've turned that concept of a group of friends getting together every season, so 4 times a year, they've turned that into now this modern day series. And the second season just came out and it was very funny. My sister, my mom, and I enjoyed the different episodes. So we watched the whole second season over the weekend, kind of binged it. And so that was fun. So we watched another episode when we came back from the banquet Saturday night. And then yesterday morning, my sister Sarah, my only sibling, she's 5 years younger, she had chosen to do the public declaration of her faith that many Christians will, consider and act on. And that is through a baptism, a water baptism. So at her church yesterday morning, myself, her family, my mom, we all had the pleasure of being there to see her share her testimony that she is a Christ follower. And they had a video clip that they played of her. And then she was the only person during that service being baptized. So it was very, very special. And it's interesting. I did have a person comment on my Facebook post about it and said, well, didn't your parents baptize you when you were children? And yes, my sister and I were both baptized in the Methodist Church, but unlike some denominations in the world of non-denominational evangelical Christians, we look at it like when you're a baby, you can be dedicated in the church and you have everybody supporting you and you're raised, hopefully with the support of your church family. But we also believe that you have a right or an opportunity to make that decision when you're old enough to say, I want to follow Jesus. And therefore, sometimes we do the baptisms later in life, maybe when you're in middle school, high school, or an adult. My daughter was dedicated in the church, as was my son, but they both chose to be baptized when they were in high school. And my husband and I joined them in the baptism as well. And so that was one of the most special days for our family, is when we were all four baptized together. And then my niece, who's going into 8th grade, she was baptized over the last year. And now my sister also joined her in being baptized. So for Christians on the evangelical or non-denominational side of things, we consider that your public declaration of your faith. And so that's why you see a lot of people being baptized many, many decades after they probably, were baptized as children, because that's been such a common practice in our culture. But I wanted to clear that up because I think people are confused, thinking that everyone who's being baptized as an adult, wasn't baptized as a kid, but they either probably were, or in the case of a lot of the evangelical churches, they were dedicated. And the difference is the dedication was their parents choosing to have them baptized. And then when they get older, it's a choice that he or she, the person, can make for themselves. So that's the thinking behind why you might see adults of all ages being immersed in the tanks that we have at our churches that are for water baptism. So thanks for letting me explain that. Another exciting development this week, if you haven't heard us talk about it, we are resuming our tour with a show at Fireside Winery in Marengo, and we cannot wait to go. We're hearing such great things about this venue. So Kylie, who is the events manager, she reached out and she's really excited to tell everyone that with the expected high heat, they are going to be able to have the event in an air-conditioned portion of the winery in the cellar. So we can't wait to see you. Tickets are selling so well. And if you are in the area and you're so inclined, we'd love to see you in person this Wednesday night, 6 to 8 p.m. for another stop on the Faith in 4-Letter Words in-person show tour, the live show. Tickets still available on faithin4letterwords.com. And when you come to the show, I promise you, you will definitely laugh. Maybe not as much as others, but at one point, you will smile or laugh out loud, I promise you. And then we also touch on a lot of pull the heartstrings of a lot of the things that we've dealt with in our lives, like so many of us, especially the sandwich generation, where we're dealing with challenges with children and raising them. And then we're also going through the other end of the spectrum, changes with our parents and our loved ones as they age. And so we definitely have a very wide variety of topics and stories and anecdotal fun that we discuss. And we would love to see you in person to connect with you. We've just made so many friends and met so many wonderful people, a lot of widows like Monique, and a lot of women that are going through the challenges that come in our later years. And so Amanda and I are also navigating those changes as different chapters of our life ensue. So some updates that I wanted to share. I, as many of you know, am transitioning out of my current role with the City of Waterloo. And so it's actually a bittersweet situation in that I've loved my job, but ready to see what God has next for me. And there is a chance that I would have some unexpected time off, hopefully between this job I'm exiting and a new one that, I'm hoping to land. And it's just kind of crazy for those of you who can relate if you've been a full-time working adult your whole life. Since I graduated college when I was 22, just turning 22, I can't imagine having more than, maybe 5 days off in a row from work. And I think the longest I ever had off was a 7-day stretch when I went on a trip with my husband. Maybe it was, maybe 7 days plus, the weekends. So excited, because even though it's stressful and it's a lot of uncertainty with job changes, I'm thinking I may have, some time off in July or August or both. And it's really exciting because it would be the first time in my adult life I've ever had that much just time to be with my husband and my kids. And so I'm really telling myself, don't miss out on the opportunity to really enjoy this time, because this never has happened in the last, 3 decades where I would have this intentional time to spend just to hang out. And my husband, of course, being a retired teacher, he loved and never complained about the teachers' circumstances, because he said, I am grateful to get my summers off. And so he always had those long summers off. And then what was nice, when the kids were born and I was working full time, when I went back to work, he could always take the kids to the falls and Lost Island and do all the summer fun activities. And it was usually him and a lot of moms that were out at these venues. And so we laughed because one time he was at the falls with the kids, and a woman who was traveling with her child and had landed in the Cedar Valley, the daughter had approached Dave and said, "Where's your wife?" This was like a younger kid. And so it was a little bit of a setup by the mom. Turns out, I think she was an adult dancer who was in town. And yeah, so you just never know when your spouse is out without you, who might hit on, the seemingly single dad who's at the water park with the kids. So I used to always joke with him that he was going out to the water park so he could see all the tramp stamps, because like Amanda has her tattoo on her lower back, and we like to joke, so many Gen Xers got the random tattoos, and that was like the thing, right, that Gen X did for some of us, was the lower back tattoo. Now, I don't have any tattoos, and I've never been one to want to get them. However, I will say, if you do have a tattoo, you're almost probably now in the majority, because if you go to the water parks anywhere, you see so many people with tattoos. And so it's like rare now that you see somebody that's middle-aged or younger that has no tattoos. Like that's like now an anomaly. Whereas years ago, it used to be kind of the opposite. Well, thanks for joining us. If you're just waking up, it's not us, it's me. I'm filling in as a solo anchor today. And I'm not filling in, right? I'm the regular co-host, but because Amanda is with her daughter Gia, I said, sure, I will do the honors and solo. So I came across an article that I wanted to share some insight about. I thought this was so fascinating, and many of you watching will, want to kind of reflect on your own situation. And if you have any tips or suggestions, please comment. We love to get your feedback as we're going live here on the group chat. So the article is talking about 7 signs that you are aging well. 7 signs you are aging well. And I thought this was so interesting because, of course, now that I'm in my 50s, many of us are in that stage and phase of life where we think of our life as now entering the second half phase, right? So when you're birth to 50, it's like that's chapter 1 or the beginning, and then, the end or the second half is your second act from age 50 and up. And I had not really thought that through until I saw some reflections and was reading some articles about, how people think differently in their 50s. And I definitely see the contrast from like my 30s and my 40s. And so many of you who are 50 and older can relate, where when we were in those younger decades, you're still so hyper focused on all the things that you're dealing with in that moment. And you're not really thinking about as much the selfish pursuits, because if you're married or have kids, it's all about, other people kind of monopolizing your time. Now, when you get into your 50s, for a lot of us who are either empty nesters or approaching, then you do kind of look back inwardly and you say, okay, well, what do I want now and what makes me happy? Because you're starting to get past the point of living your life, to make your kids happy, because you don't have to focus everything on them because they are becoming their own, hopefully independent, productive people. So it's just a mind shift that I've undergone that I probably didn't even recognize was so pronounced until I really could relate to some of these articles and TikToks and social media, where it's like, yeah, that's right. Now that we're 50, we can say, okay, well, what do we want, right? We don't have to always now answer to everybody in our midst, because hopefully they're moving on independently in some respects with their lives. So these are the 7 tips that I wanted to share that, according to researchers, are a reflection of you living well as you age. Number 1, you take time to learn new things. The older we get, the fewer chances we have to absorb new info, and many of us are far out of school or work. Okay, well, that's a great point, because you retire and then maybe you're not taking on new hobbies or habits. My mom is very much the type who's always stayed active. So she's had the cutting garden and done the gardening, and she's done book club. And then in her, older years, she said she really started to return to a joy of reading, as has Amanda. And my mom was not a reader as much when she was busy and younger and in the throes of being a full-time elementary principal and a mom and doing all the things. And so she said she really got back into reading as she got older. And I know for my daughter, she's such the lifelong learner type that she, as a college sophomore, just picked up doing the embroidery and like the needlepoint. So she's been doing that and made a really cool embroidered shirt for my niece. And she was able to draw a flower freehand because she's so creative and is a great artist. And so then she was able to embroider the flower on my niece's shirt. So she did that in one night. She just sat there and worked. So she's very crafty and I am not. So it's kind of fun when you have a child who's got that ability to pick up different hobbies and skills so easily. And that was the first one. The second one, you're honest about your needs. And this is a good one. It's so often people don't age well because they're not upfront about what their needs are. And I think this is really critical, right? Because so many of us, especially moms, when we are younger, we're always worried about the needs of everyone else around us. So you're thinking about your kids, or you're thinking about your spouse, or you're always thinking about, how you're being received as a coworker or a friend. And so basically what researchers are telling us is you need to be okay saying, this is what I need. I'm feeling lonely. I need someone to go out with me on a certain night. I mean, you need to just sort of own the fact that you would like some companionship, or you definitely might need help. I mean, especially if you're going through a situation where you might have your eyes being dilated or a minor outpatient procedure, you might need somebody to give you a ride. And if you are single and live alone, that means you have to ask a friend or family. And for some of the women, especially as they age, they might not have a family member close by because maybe the kids moved away, or you might live, far away from your siblings or your extended family. And so that's when you really do have to lean into and rely on friends and neighbors. And Dave and I have had to do that for years because both of our parents lived in other states. And so there were times when, like in an emergency, I had to call on, a friend to help. And so you really appreciate those people in those moments when you don't have immediate family in your midst. The third one, you have a community. Loneliness and isolation are a big problem, so much so that the Surgeon General has declared an epidemic of isolation and loneliness throughout our country, which is so, so sad. The pandemic, of course, only accelerated this. So that is the plus of technology, right? We have a community right here. Faith in 4-Letter Words, the group chat, all the layers of how we engage with people. Amanda and I consider that to be a community of mostly women. And we really are intentional about having tough conversations and being out there with a lot of content that we don't want to just shoot out like a fire hose, so to speak. We want to have growth and connection and opportunity to engage. And so that is the plus of these social platforms, is we can replicate a community that was once only reserved for in-person engagement or, letter writing or phone calls. But now, because of digital streaming, we can have a sense of community that is so far beyond what we ever dreamed would be possible, when years ago you had to have thousands of dollars of equipment and you had to be in a studio or some kind of professional television network to be able to have this level of live engagement. So fun how technology has completely upended that model. And speaking of engagement, we want to thank the sponsors who support the group chat. We've had a lot of statewide support from some very community-minded women thinking, pro-women, thinking entities, one of which is the Urology Center of Iowa. So I'm still fascinated with this. They have this new thing called the Emsella chair. And if you use this Emsella chair, it's supposed to simulate like 1,000 Kegel exercises. So talk about an efficient way to strengthen your pelvic floor muscles. And they have everything from treating conditions like urinary urgency and frequency, overactive bladder, incontinence, and pelvic organ prolapse, which is very common. Of course, a lot of the big childbearing that so many women do, big births, that will lead to pelvic floor issues that can cause a lot of issues with their bladder. And so this care is very personalized, discreet, and focused on very real results with very non-invasive procedures. So schedule your visit today, Urology Center of Iowa, and that website is iowauro.com, iowauro.com. And then real quick, just wanted to mention another sponsor that's been in our mix lately, and that is the Canoyer Garden Center. So they also have a glass house market, anything you want with your garden and all the outdoor plants and the beautiful perennials, veggies, herbs, and more. And then they have this market where you can get the little knickknacks, the tchotchkes that my husband loves. He has some garden decor that he likes to put out. And so it's the Canoyer Garden Center and Glasshouse Market in Ankeny and Grimes, so in the Des Moines area. And you can check out their Facebook page as well. They have some great specials throughout the time right now, spring and summer, when we've got all the flowers and plants in bloom. This weather this morning, one plus, it's saving all of us from having to go out and water all of our plants. Now, I say that my husband is my live-in gardener, so he's the one who's doing all the plant watering. Now I do the deadheading, but I can't take any credit for watering the plants. So thanks for joining me as I solo this morning. I'm going through, if you're just jumping on, the 7 signs that you're aging well. 7 signs that you're aging well. The first 3 are you take time to learn new things, you're honest about your needs, and the third is you have a community. Now, here's the fourth: you prioritize your physical health. You eat nutritious foods, exercising, important elements as we age. So this is a big one for me. So if some of you can relate, when you have a lot of things going on in your life that are out of your control, right? Like your kids and the choices they make are oftentimes out of our control. My situation professionally with my job being eliminated due to budget cuts, out of my control. However, one thing that I can control and one thing that many of you can relate to is you can do better with your diet and your physical activity, or the elements of how you live your life that you get to control and decide. So I am proud that starting in January of this year, I made a very conscious shift to go back to being really intentional about eating healthy, having a lower portioned diet, and getting off a lot of the carbs and sugar, and having the processed foods be very minimal in my diet. So it's been a wonderful, wonderful pivot. And I've been through periods like this before. And this time, I think, is a little bit different in that it's been easier for me to really do some of this because it's the one area where I feel like I can stay disciplined and in control when so much is uncertain and out of my control. So some of you can probably relate to that. And I'm definitely one who's been an emotional eater over the years. And so it's been good for me to just challenge myself that I don't have to eat my feelings and I don't have to turn to food as a false comfort, knowing that it's very fleeting, because after you eat the bag of chips, you don't feel good like you did when you first opened them, right? So we can all kind of relate to the emotional highs and lows that are often tied to binging and eating. So interesting take is, you prioritizing your physical health is a sign that you're aging well. Another one, you do things you enjoy. It's not realistic to think that you'll never deal with an illness or an injury, but that doesn't mean you can't do the things you love to do, like traveling, learning a new recipe, or playing games with your family. This is a good one. Do things that you enjoy. And it's funny, I mean, we laugh about this, where when we, especially Amanda and I, in our former jobs in television, where you're so busy and you just have all the things going, right? Like women tend to do, all the balls in the air that we're juggling. We would laugh and say, we really didn't have hobbies, because the only hobby was like, can you find an hour to get away from everything and just watch mindless television? For Amanda, her escape after the news, especially on Friday nights, was often Dateline. She likes to watch Dateline episodes. For me, it was always, and still is, reality television. And so coming home, I'd be keyed up, having done the 10 o'clock news, husband and kids already asleep. And so there I'd be at like 11 o'clock at night, eating a snack and watching some reality television show. So that was kind of our outlet for enjoyment and relaxation. But now, as I've gotten older, there are a lot more things that I definitely pursue or try to do. One of them that some of you, can relate to too, is I just enjoy that time sometimes where I'm fully alone. And so being fully alone for me is really a lot of times at work. And so when I'm in my office, there is a peace and a solitude when you can just be alone. And I enjoy, as crazy as this sounds, folding laundry. So there is something for me about the organizational side of folding laundry that is like cathartic. And I never knew this about myself until I got older and I started hearing all these women reflect on how much they hate folding laundry and how it sits in a pile and then everybody walks by it and no one acts on it. And then if they have a husband who doesn't enjoy folding laundry, or who complains about, not wanting to do that particular chore, it's just cool that my husband likes and doesn't mind doing laundry and is really a baseball pants whisperer with our son's white baseball pants, and now is power washing and using, the OxyClean and does all the things. I like to fold the baseball pants. I like to fold the towels. I like to refold the towels after my husband attempts to fold them. So some of you might be like me, and we don't have to criticize. We can just do a redo. So I reorganize the way the dishes are put into the dishwasher, and then I refold things like towels because yeah, I just have not entirely OCD, but a little bit of that, like, okay, well, this is how I would like it to be done. So you don't criticize, you don't complain, you just redo it your way, right? Back to this top 7 signs you're aging well. So let's recap. You're honest about your needs, you take time to learn new things, you have a community. That's important. Some of us, it's through church, some of us through social groups. You prioritize your physical health. You do things you enjoy. You talk to your doctor about the medications you take. This is a good one. Just because you were prescribed a medication in your 50s doesn't mean it's still serving you 20, 30, or even 40 years later. And I thought that was really interesting. So, one thing that you need to do is if you've been taking the same medication for decades, you need to ask your doctor, have there been changes in your life, like weight loss or other changes in your health that might warrant being able to get off of said medication? And so they said many times we end up taking too many medicines for what we actually need, and your body is always changing and it may not need certain medications. So you need to talk to your doctor and just revisit that med list and say, are some of these now unnecessary? Now, one thing for me, fortunately, I'm not one who's had to take a lot of medication over my life. I've been fortunate. So when I was between pregnancies in 2007, I've talked about this. I had half my thyroid removed, and I was told then, hey, you're still in your 30s, but by the time you hit 40, you're probably going to have to take thyroid medication because the half that remains will not regulate your body as the whole. As things go, prayerfully, I have been finding the opposite, that my thyroid still acts, even though I only have half of it, to regulate my body as if it were a whole thyroid. So I just had another blood test last week to confirm that my thyroid levels are good. And so thankfully, I've not had to take any medication for my thyroid despite not having a whole one. And I'm now, as I said, into my 50s. So that's been a plus. The other thing is during COVID, those of you who got COVID may also, like me, have a long haul COVID symptom, and mine is hives. So if I don't take a small prescription hive prevention pill every night, I would be scratching, itching everywhere, and I would have that hive flare up almost immediately. So after 2020, 2021 passed, and I was into this, great, now I have to take a daily medication to prevent hives mode. Once more time passed, I thought, oh, it's been like 3 years since COVID. I'm going to go off this hive medication. Within 48 hours, my symptoms and the flare up started. So for some of us, we probably will take medications for life born out of whatever COVID did to us and triggered in us that we may never overcome. My friend Bob, he never regained the full sense of taste and smell, which is crazy. And so, I mean, the only plus for him is he's kept his weight off because he doesn't enjoy food like he did, which is very sad, right? For some of the people that have, like me, these long haul COVID outcomes that are just very, very bizarre. So I feel fortunate that mine is minimal and can be maintained with that hive prevention. Next point, you plan for the future. The other thing, this is coming from a researcher, the other thing I always tell people is plan ahead, because as much as we all want to age well into our hundreds, healthy and happily, there is a very good chance that something might happen where you need to be hospitalized or you might need more support in your home. This is such a huge, important topic. We don't talk enough about it. It is always top of mind for my family and for my mother and my sibling Sarah and I, because we always want our mom to be happy, healthy, and safe. And so the condo building that she's been in since my father passed away has been wonderful for so many reasons. She has a community of people that are all living in the building with her, and she's become very close with some widows. Shirley's right down the hall from her. Also, it has underground parking, which in this Midwest climate is such an incredible amenity. It's like priceless, because she has two vehicles that she parks underneath in this underground spacious parking. So when she goes in and out of her car, regardless of, rain, shine, sleet, or snow, she's in a safe, dry environment where she can then pull out of, with the remote control garage, this underground parking. So my sister and I love that feature in her condo building. And then the other bonus, she's on the third floor. So being on the top floor, she has the cathedral ceilings, and she doesn't have an above her neighbor to cause the pitter patter on her ceiling. So she's got like a soundproof, very nice space in that it has and looks more spacious with the high ceilings. So we love this, that she can live in this place. And she always says, if, I want to stay here as long as I can, but if something happened where she needed more support or a higher level of care, she already had put down a deposit at this village, senior living village in Peoria, that's considered one of the nicest facilities in the area. And I've toured it. I've been there a couple times with her, and it's so nice. And so she's on like a waiting list. And then every 6 months or so, they'll call and they say, hey, we have a place that's opened up for you. And then she'll say, I'm good, I don't need it. So it's just, my mom is like the prototype for being proactive. So she's always got a plan, and she's always thinking about, what can I do now to prevent, chaos or challenges down the road. And so it's so great that she's been so mindful and proactive about having a plan should she need to make other arrangements for the future. And so many of us, and I've talked to so many people that are in this boat, it's like they're afraid to bring it up to their parents, because then they think their parents are going to think, oh, you think I have one foot in the grave, or, oh, you think I'm that old that I'm going to need a nursing home. All of those reasons why that might be their reaction, or why it's an uncomfortable conversation, that should be minimized, in contrast to the elephant in the room, which is, well, what would happen if all of a sudden they were hospitalized and they couldn't safely go back in their home and take care of themselves? Then what are you going to do? Because then you're scrambling and you don't have a plan. And then the hospital's pushing, trying to get you out of there. So, I mean, I've just seen people go through this, right? And it is so wonderful if you have a parent, as I do, like my mom, where it's like we talk about it, we plan it out. Crazy as this sounds, we've already met with the funeral home and planned my mom's whole funeral. And that was something she initiated and wanted to do, because we saw and went through it with my dad, where all of a sudden you're like, oh, great, now we have 48 hours to make all these very big decisions. So my mom, my sister, and I sat down. I was on a Zoom, joining, via Zoom, this meeting. And she just said, I want this, I don't want that. The other thing is, if you haven't gone through it, the funeral homes today, and this is just their business model, they sell you all these add-ons and extras, much like, the warranty on a used car. So you just have to be prepared. If you don't want to have all the things, you don't need to have a thumbprint, necklace made out of the person's ashes, or you don't need to have this layer or that layer of tribute or honor or memorabilia. I mean, it's not anything that is offensive. It's just a lot of decisions. And so for my mom, my sister, and I, we already knew, having gone through it with my dad, that there were quite a few things that we were like, nope, we don't need that. We don't want that. And my mom and dad decided long ago they were both going to be cremated. And oh my gosh, you talk about an expense that has just ballooned in this world, is paying for funeral services. So when my mom and my sister and I went to the funeral home for my dad, he was cremated. And then with all of the expenses all told, I want to say it got up to like maybe $16,000. And that was even with cremation, right? So apparently, new stat, anecdotally, like 75% of people now are being cremated because of how exorbitant the cost is. So what's interesting is if you go now, only 5 years later, when my mom, my sister, and I sat down to plan her service, the cost had gone up, I think, 60% since 2021. That's how much things are escalating in terms of the cost. So that's why many of you have seen this. That's why we see all the time people we know where a loved one unexpectedly dies and they immediately are on social media having a GoFundMe page, because a lot of people are not saving to put money toward an unexpected funeral service. It is so costly. So very, very tough when you go through that. And then awful if it's a situation where the person who passed didn't have any plan or money to pay for his or her service. So in the case of my brother-in-law, we're going through this right now. When he unexpectedly passed away, now my husband and his sister have to navigate taking care of all the things, because he was in a situation where he and his wife were actually like going through a divorce. So, I mean, he was basically a single person. And that's what's so crazy, is to be in his early 60s and be single and then unexpectedly pass away. There was no plan. There was no conversation about, well, where do you want to be buried? Or how do you want, your service to look? Or what, all of these things, right? So very tough for those of you who can relate and who are going through it. My dogs are barking, probably something related to the rain, who knows. If you're just joining us, I'm Tara, soloing. Amanda's with her daughter and her soccer team heading to state. We're going over, and I'm being very long-winded in doing it, but we're going over an article I came across and wanted to share, the 7 signs you are aging well. And that got us into a deep dive talk about all the things that happen when somebody passes away, the decisions, the funeral expenses, all the things. So let's recap. You take time to learn new things. You're honest about your needs. You have a community. You prioritize your physical health. You do things you enjoy. You talk to your doctor about the medications you take. You plan for the future is the final point of signs you're aging well. If you are somebody right now who has grandparents or parents that are in their later years, so I'm thinking, 65-ish and up, have that conversation with them. And it doesn't have to be awkward, because all you have to say is, hey, somebody I know, me, was talking about the fact that she knows a lot of people didn't plan, didn't talk, and didn't say what they wanted. And do you want me to make all those decisions for you if something should happen? Or do you want to tell me what you want, right? And I don't think that's morbid. I don't think it's morbid to say, as my mom did, I really love this song, or I really love this scripture, or this would mean a lot to me if this was a part of celebrating my life. And so my niece, who's going into 7th or going into 8th grade now, hard to believe, she's a really good singer, and she has been doing songs, not a lot of performing, but over the years has been entertaining through concerts or other performances through school. And so there's a song that my mom wants her to sing at her service if my mom passed away. And so that was just really neat to know and hear, because then my niece, who's quite young, of course, has it in her mind. Hopefully it would be years from now that she would even have to worry about that. But she kind of knows, okay, well, Nana wants me to sing a special song. And so you just, plant that seed so that if and when we had to go through some kind of life change, we all are very well aware of the person's wishes. And it's a gift when you have a parent who will, give you all that detail and give you that open, honest conversation while they're still with you. My father would have been the opposite. He was not a proactive person. So had he outlived my mom, everything would be fly by the seat. It would not be planned out the way that my mom has so proactively done it. All right, we're going to go to the comments, because You guys are so nice to hang with me as I solo the group chat this morning. We have very wet weather. I was talking about it at the beginning of the hour. I drove through horrible torrential rain yesterday with Thomas coming back from Peoria, Illinois, and it was just awful. I mean, it was like the fire hose at my windshield, blinding rain. So for those of you who safely navigated the weather yesterday, we were fortunate because I saw three or four crashes along the way between Quad Cities and Waterloo. Monique, when I need someone, not too many people are available or willing. That is the hard part. And you live far. And that's right. So you need to find, if you can, that one person where maybe you can kind of return the favor. So I like to look at it, like it's almost like a transactional situation, which isn't a bad thing, right? Where you have a friend or you have a neighbor, and then you might say, hey, I know in the next couple months, I might need a ride sometime to or from a medical appointment. Is there something that I can do for you so that you could help me out, right? So, I mean, you almost have to offer. And a lot of people don't want to say no to your face. And so we always laugh about this. There is some level of wanting to speak to the person over the phone or in person, in contrast to a text, because it's easier for people to say no through a text. So if you walk outside and knock on your neighbor's door, or you call them on the phone and actually have a conversation, people are especially Midwesterners, we're more inclined then to say yes and oblige, versus if you text and say, hey, in 2 weeks, I have an appointment. Can you give me a ride? And then it's a quick text back. Sorry, I have my bridge group. Sorry, I'm going to my water aerobics class. Sorry, we always can easily bow out or refuse help if it's just this very impersonal texting. Katie said, I love watching you ladies. You have really enhanced my confidence. So grateful for the things you do. That means so much, Katie, because we are all trying to just grow and get better no matter our age. And so what we are confident and comfortable with in our 50s definitely was not the case in previous decades. So you get older and wiser. And as my friend has quoted, I believe the famous author Maya Angelou, when we know better, we do better, right? So we hopefully are lifelong learners, and we know better as we go through experiences or learn from others, and then we can do better. So I love that old adage. Good morning to my friend Veronica. Glad that she's watching and joining the morning show. Angie Kinsey said, agree wholeheartedly. No idea what you agreed wholeheartedly about, but thank you for affirming whatever I was running my mouth about. Amy said, my parents recently planned their entire post-death, booked and paid for it all, so we don't have that stress. That is such a gift. My mom did the same thing. So not only did we have the meeting, my sister, my mom, and I, but my mom was able to tell us all of her wishes. Wonderful to be able to talk to her and know what she wants, even though we're, gratefully, prayerfully years away from having to deal with it. It was just nice to have her wishes expressed and to have that understanding. And then she too opened her checkbook, as she so often does, and paid for everything. So what an incredible, generous gift to all of us, because now not only do we know her wishes if something were to happen, but she has already financially covered all of the expenses that are only going up and up and up. And so, I mean, they're projecting in the next 5 to 10 years, so many of the baby boomers are going to be aging into higher care needs and all the other layers of getting older. And it will be off the charts expensive for the level of care that so many people need. And as I'm going through a job change, go on any job board anywhere and you will see like 100 postings for nurses. They need traveling nurses. They need doctors. So there's a huge shortage of these providers and people that are going to give the care to all these people that are going to be aging into all of their years of really needing said care. So the crisis is already here, but it's only going to exacerbate in the coming years if you aren't aware of it already. So my mom is now watching. Thank you, Mom, for joining the group chat. And she just said another thing to do is make sure you have a will and put everything in a trust. Makes it so much easier for your family when one passes. Great point. So this is another gift that my mom did. So when my father was still living and he was still mentally with it some of the time, she did such a smart thing. She took their whole estate, living estate, and she met with an estate planner. And she and my dad were able to move everything from like joint accounts or an account only in my dad's name into a trust. This is why you do that, because if something happened, which it did to my dad, my mom didn't have a lot of the accounts in her name. And when you are a widow and you don't have everything in your name, it's like a Herculean effort to get everything switched over, to get it all into, to get the deceased person's name off the account. I mean, it was a process. So by putting everything into this trust, if something happened to my mom, my sister and I immediately then would call the person who is the arbiter or the executor of the trust, and then he or she would set everything in motion. So there's no probate. Probate is that period that you have to go through when someone passes away, where even though in the will or even though legally they're leaving everything to you, if it's not in your name, you have to go through this whole period of probate, which can take months. And so for some people, they can't pay or afford to pay for all the things because they're waiting for the inheritance to like cover the funeral, and you're not going to get it for months unless it's set up in a trust, whereby then my sister and I are the co-executors, and we instantly then have power of attorney because we are a part of the trust, versus if it were my mom and everything in her name having to go through the legal process before we can take over. So it isn't cheap, but it's much cheaper to pay to do some of this up front than the stress, expense, and all the other things that would happen on the backside. So if you are somebody who has enough assets and enough potential, inheritance challenges by way of multiple siblings or family members, you need to figure some of this stuff out, because nothing brings out the worst in people than a post-death fight over money, right? And I've seen horrible things come into play in my own life, because we had a situation where my grandpa and his girlfriend were killed in a horrible car crash. And the fact is, the reason they weren't married is because they were both widows, and she would have lost her health insurance and pension from her husband had they been married. So they were like common law for years, right? Well, when she and he were killed in this crash, her family was not at all gracious or supportive of us, and in fact wanted to like fight my grandpa's estate to get money, when the whole thing was just a tragedy all the way around for both families. So it was an awful, awful experience that we saw firsthand, where it was like they were putting their own selfish financial thoughts above the fact that we were mourning the unexpected loss of two people. So very eye-opening when someone passes away. And those of you watching who've had relatives go through it, the joke is, as soon as a person passes, you better get there, because their home or their farm or whatever might be stripped of every valuable item by some wayward relative who shows up on the scene. So my mom and I could write a book on some of the things, that have happened in our family. And I know many of you have your own stories to share as well. Amanda and I laugh about it a lot, because her mom and a lot of women in that baby boomer generation, or the generation preceding us, the Gen X current generation, so our parents, they collected a lot. So some people, it's Swarovski crystal. There were Hummels. In the case of Amanda's mom, she had, thousands invested in these Longaberger baskets. And Amanda said she wants none of it. And I said, there's not one basket, or there's not one thing that you want. And she said, no, she said, I don't want any of it. So it's tough because it's meaningful and valuable to the person. And then if they have a child like me who's more sentimental, like I care about the stuff because my mom sees it as valuable or sentimental. And so then I am very mindful of like, okay, well, I want to make sure then that I hold on to it or it gets passed down. But there's only so much room and there's only so much you can take. And then in my case, we have a large home, but we want to downsize when my son graduates high school. So then you're like, okay, if I'm downsizing, that's even more of a reason why I can't, take all the things. And so you have to be very strategic about what you can take. And then what you do take, you want to make sure that if it's something of value, you have that conversation with your parents. So my mom, again, she's so organized and proactive. She has cataloged every valuable thing she has, from antiques to expensive art, and she has it photographed and in a book, and every item is detailed with its value or whatever information she has about it, so that if we were in a situation where we were deciding, well, who gets what or what are we going to do with some of this, she wants to make sure we know this is a really valuable piece. So you don't want to sell it at a yard sale or just inadvertently give it away. You want to be really mindful of all the things. And so a lot of people will say, well, I didn't even know that that was worth anything. So have that conversation with your parents and your grandparents and say, what do you have around the house that's very valuable or an antique? And then they're going to go, why? Do you need money? Are you trying to sell it? And then you just say, no, we want to make sure that when something happens years from now, the grandchildren or the great grandchildren get the family heirlooms, because a lot of young people have no concept of value and they don't understand, the greatest generation and how they held on to everything because they didn't live in disposable societies like we do, right? They saved everything. The Cool Whip container, was used for years as a Tupperware. So things have changed. Okay, we have more comments. Thank you all for weighing in on this, because these are very important conversations that we need to have more often. Tracy said, please, please, please get a will drawn up at the very, very least. My dad passed without a will, and oh, the headache. Amen. You don't want to have the conversation right now because you think it's uncomfortable. I'll tell you what's really uncomfortable is you sitting there with your siblings, and I haven't been through this. I just know people who have. You sitting there with your siblings going, well, who's going to write the check for the funeral? Because we have no money coming out of our parents' estate because it's tied up in probate. So which of you has the money sitting around to pay $15,000 to $20,000 for a funeral? Oh, wait. You want that really nice coffin? You don't want them to be cremated? Oh, okay. So you're going to pay the 12 grand for the coffin, or for the, what is the word that I'm looking for? So not just the coffin, but that's so bad. I can't even think of the word. So there's all the layers of how you bury somebody. So if you're going to take the ashes, you're going to have to think about, are we going to keep the ashes in an urn? Who's going to pay for the urn? And then if you're going to bury the ashes, you have to still pay for the plot and the funeral. My in-laws, Dave's parents, they did not have a plan of where they wanted to be buried. My parents always did, because there was like a family plot and many spots for family members in this rural cemetery in Illinois. But we literally went with my father-in-law to pick out the plot when his wife, my mother-in-law, passed away. I mean, they didn't make that decision until the very end. And then he did, like my mom, the proactive thing of, okay, I want to make sure I have this ready, planned, and paid for. And then he took care of all that. And then, as fate would have it, he passed away a short time after my mother-in-law. So it was wonderful for my husband's family, for all of us, that had already been taken care of. Amy Shannon, also make sure other people have bank checking account access now. Critical point. If someone passes away, no, you're not going to just roll up to the bank and ask for money to be taken out of the account. You have to go through all the identity layers, and the death certificate has to be provided, all the things. So my mom, also so organized, she has a book, and in the book, it has all of her passwords, all of her account information. And then we also then know that the person who's the point person for the trust, the professional that we would go to, they then would be able to set everything in motion. So it's like we joke, Olivia Pope, where she says it's handled, that, that show that she did, We Scandal, I think it's called. And Amanda likes to do that Olivia Pope reenactment where when we've had a situation, she's called me and she'll say, it's handled, which I think is hilarious. And yes, we're Gen X, so we do this to simulate a phone because we used landlines with cords. So my mom has said, and it's true, because of how she set everything up with this living trust and then ultimately the trust that would survive her and my father, like their legacy, if you will. We then can just pick up the phone and say, activate, stage 1 of the trust transitioning now past my mom and dad. So, I mean, it's so great for my sister and I, because it's like, it's all taken care of. So there's no stress and worry. And then we know my mom's wishes. And that's such a gift if you know what the person wants. Jane Patterson, bank account state POD, paid on death. So she's saying that the person would then know that the bank account would be activated to pay on the person's death, whatever remains like in their account. I think that's what she's saying. And so that is the other thing that people forget, is like, if the person had outstanding bills or debts or all the things, you don't get to just wipe everything clean when the person passes away. So you have to navigate some of the layers of, unfortunately, financial information that was withheld from you because it was somebody's private financial dealings that they didn't want to share with you. And so I think that's been an eye-opener to a lot of people, is all of a sudden you recognize that there might be this outstanding debt that you didn't even know existed. And then the person passes away. And in my family's case, my husband's family, there was a call that came after a family member died where it was like from a debt collection service. And then they're calling all the surviving family members. And then you're going like, what debt? Because you don't know anything about it. Right. So that's really common. And I get it. Not everybody's going to share their personal financial information with you, especially if it's something that's not positive. Like if it's a stressful situation, where they have a big debt. So yeah, the bank access one is a really good one, Amy. Thanks for sharing that. So the other thing is, if you right now have a parent who is a caregiver or a widow, then you would hope that he or she already takes care of paying all the bills. Because in the case of my grandma, when she was a longtime widow, that was the first sign of her starting to have memory issues and then ultimately Alzheimer's, is she was like double paying bills. And so if you're not mindful of or aware of what this person is doing day to day, week to week with their money and how they're managing it, it can get really out of hand quickly, because there could be scam elements involved too, where, someone is double paying. And if it's a person that's not honest and they're benefiting from this person, a senior, being mixed up, they can really take advantage of the older person. And they can never, of course, tell the family member, hey, she's mixed up. I got paid twice for a service I only performed once. A lot of things can unfold that can be just very stressful and very sad if the person is independent, living alone, and doesn't even recognize their confusion. And so hopefully you are that person where your mom or your grandma or somebody that's in, your family circle can be the ombudsman of sorts, where you check in on this person and you just say, hey, how's everything going with the bill paying? Or do you have enough money to meet your needs? I mean, you see it all the time. We've got these seniors that are in their 70s and 80s that are at Walmart, they're at Lowe's, they're working because they don't have enough money to pay the basic necessity bills. And the fixed income thing is real. And when your income is fixed, and then gas prices and grocery prices and the cost of everything else, our cost of living continues to go through the roof, there's a huge gap between what somebody has in their monthly fixed income and what their potential expenses will be. Because as we all know, you need only walk into Casey's gas station as I did yesterday. It wasn't Casey's, it was a Love's that I stopped at on my way home. And I looked over at the shelf where they had the beef jerky. And I kid you not, it was for one little pack of beef jerky that was like, two little strips. And it was $7.88. And I just thought, $7.88 for what for me would be like 4 bites of beef jerky? No, thank you, right? So that's how mindful we are of expenses now. Also, when I was in Illinois, of course, they have a higher gas tax and they don't subsidize ethanol like Iowa. So their gas is always exorbitant. And I had not filled up my gas tank in Peoria. So I waited until I was out on the highway and I needed to fill up and I was down to about half a tank. Well, in Iowa, our gas in the last month dropped back down to like, I think 351 was the last that I had paid maybe last week. Well, yesterday when I stopped at this Love's in Illinois, it was like 465. I think it was. So I paid $65 for half a tank of gas for my Kia Telluride, which isn't a huge tank. It's not like a big gas guzzling SUV. It's a smaller SUV. So that was crazy to pay $65. And then of course, my husband is always like, fill up in Iowa, fill up before you cross the line. But I'm usually one who will wait to get gas. And so then you kind of are stuck with, wherever you are, you just have to pay the piper. So if you're coming in late, joining the morning show, I can't believe it, but we are already well past the hour because we just had so many fun things to discuss this morning. And here I went into it thinking I'm going to just do maybe 30 minutes since it's just me. And as fate would have it, we really dove deep into conversations that are critical, right? For those of us that are dealing with all the layers of aging and the seasons of life. And so thanks for hanging with me. And Patrice said, thank you, Tara, for sharing this helpful information. And Jane is commenting again, thanks for clarifying. She said, all our accounts say POD. So when we pass, the kids have instant access to the money. So she set it up and she's saying, you can put in your accounts the caveat that paid on death to, and then indicate your children or your loved one that the account would go to. And so that is another way then that, she's saying you could make sure that everything was set up for your loved ones. If you have enough assets like a house, a condo, vehicles, a lot of investments, if you have all those different layers of your estate, consider having a trust, because the trust is all encompassing. So there wouldn't be issues with the cars, issues with the house, issues, it would be all encompassing in that it would be immediately under the umbrella of the trust. And so that is such a great way to bypass the whole probate process that many of you have probably walked through if you're trying to navigate the loss of somebody. What a great conversation. Very one-sided. I was the only one talking, but I appreciate your interaction with your comments. Have a great Monday. Grab your umbrella if you're heading out, or shoes that can get wet because you're inevitably going to be going through some puddles. And I hope you have a great week, and we will see you right back here on Wednesday morning for more of the group chat. Make it a great day. Oh, forgot my Bible verse. I'll give you 2 on Wednesday.
Thank you for watching the group chat. The show is brought to you by the empowering staff at Urology Center of Iowa, Senoyer Gardens, Azalea Lane Boutique, and Splendor the Medical Spa.